Hey, it's Chad here. Just want to say thank you for tuning in to a Level Deeper podcast. For the last week, Eileen and I have been sort of hosting my family, my mom and my grandma in Alaska, and having a great time showing them around and traveling together and experiencing some incredible things. So, because of that, I don't have a new interview that I conducted to share with you this week. Instead, I have a podcast that I was interviewed on. A few weeks ago, a guest and friend of the show, Angelo Santiago, had me on his podcast, We Are the Men. It was a great conversation where we talked about some of the why behind this show and some of the things that I've sort of noticed or learned from having many of these conversations with people. I gave Angelo a whole backstory as to where this whole make it meaningful phrase that I use comes from. And hint, I haven't always viewed life that way. In fact, there was a phase of my life that was very different. And I share that story in this conversation. Lastly, I pull back the curtain a little bit as to what Eileen and I's lives are like living in this van together, and from a relationship standpoint, how we've navigated being in like 50 square feet together for the last 2 years or more. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I think as a listener of the show, you're going to enjoy it as well. All right, so here's my conversation on Angelo's podcast, We Are the Men.
Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Angelo Santiago, and this is the We Are the Men podcast, a show that is dedicated to sharing the stories of men who are all connected by a commitment to having a positive impact on the world through the actions they take in their own lives. My guest today is Chad Miles. Chad is an entrepreneur, creator, husband, full-time traveler, and host of a Level Deeper podcast. He lives in a self-built camper van with his wife and dog and is on a mission to make life meaningful. And I got the pleasure to meet Chad on the A Level Deeper podcast. Your wife and collaborator on the podcast invited me to come on. We got a chance to drop in and have a beautiful conversation. And honestly, I'm going to tell you full honesty, as we plan to have you on this podcast and I'm going through my day, I'm like, man, I'm excited to connect with Chad again. It's like, I really feel like in that short conversation that we had, it's like, I made a friend here and I'm curious to see what's been going on in his life, how the podcast has been going, how the camper van life has been going, how your connection with your wife and all the things that you're doing, just to drop in and like you invite people to do on your podcast to go that level deeper and see what's really going on. So Chad, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for saying yes. Excited to connect with you again and just share our stories and share what's going on for us as an invitation for the listeners to explore their own lives and see what doors opens up for them through this. So thanks, brother. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for having me on the show. We were just talking before we recorded it about how if you get to depth quickly, if you go deep with people quickly, it's amazing how fast you can develop a true connection. So the feeling's mutual, my friend. Good to be back.
Yeah. And like as we were going back and forth about it, it's like a good challenge almost. You know, here's somebody, whether I see them every single week, like somebody like another dad or mom that drops off their kids at the same place that I drop off my kid for school, or maybe it's somebody I only get to see every 3 or 6 months. Like, how quickly can I connect with them at what I would call like a heart level, at like a real level, which is what you describe in your podcast as a level deeper. It's a beautiful practice. Sometimes I get it right. Sometimes I mess it up. Sometimes I go too deep, too fast. Sometimes I struggle to even go underwater, you know? And so I'm really curious in connecting with you about what brought you to creating this podcast, what you've uncovered about yourself and others through having these conversations of deep listening, of open sharing, and then sharing these stories with a general public and what feedback you've gotten from people. But before we get there, in any conversation I have with someone, I always just like to know where they're at in life, what's going on in their world, what season of life you're finding yourself in, what challenges are showing up for you, what invitations to new great things are happening for you. Just drop us a little bit of what's going on in Chad's world right now.
I've been exploring, and for those listening, translated, exploring is my way of saying struggling, but that's my reframe of things that I'm going through, sitting with. So anyway, I've been exploring this idea of, I guess, between pushing and allowing in my life. So I've typically been someone that, I don't know, I have this energy of I have to push to go create the things that I want. I think sometimes as men, we feel like, I find myself feeling like, as a man, I have to go create my own destiny and I have to make all these things happen. And this pushing energy, I've got to be creating all of these things. And it creates a lot of dis-ease in my life to where I'm not present. I'm not still in the moment. And I think the opposite in my mind of that is an energy of allowing, being more still, and allowing things into my life. So I've been exploring that a lot recently because this idea of allowing is not something that feels natural to me. I don't think it's my tendency that I've built. And, it's just one of the things of like, I'm curious if I can be more in that place, in that energy. What if I could actually create more ease in my life, more of the things that I want to attract? So that's something I've been struggling with because it's very difficult for me to find that balance. It's a hard place for me to be, but I'm exploring it.
That's a great exploration. And I know exactly what you're talking about from my own personal experience of I spent so much of my life, even recently, what I felt is that pushing, like really like fighting against the current. And in the creation of this We Are the Men podcast and all the work that I'm doing and what I'm really feeling called into this purpose of creating that which I am created, I've shared this with somebody before. It felt like I used to be like running with one of those parachutes on my back. You see those like Olympic sprinters practicing with, like that's what it felt like. And now it literally feels like the parachute is in front of me and the wind is behind me. And it's like, it's guiding me and it's taking me. And it's more energizing. There's just something more that's happening because I feel so aligned in what I'm doing. But then there's days where it does feel like the opposite. Like there's a quick wind shift and maybe it shoots me off to the right and gets me off my balance. And that becomes the continued playfulness of how do I get back to this center? And so, yeah, honor you on that exploration because I don't think you're alone in that by any means. I think society and culture has taught us like just keep your head down and keep pounding against the thing that you're supposed to be doing. And at some point you'll break through and I don't know, at some point like check in with yourself and should you stop the pounding and actually like get to creating something that actually is aligned with you.
The pounding is exhausting. The constantly pushing, trying to create is exhausting. I'll share a really quick story on this. A couple weeks ago, so we were out in Utah and we were staying at it's kind of like a fancy outdoor campground. And to make it a short story, my wife and I are from Michigan. We have this vision of maybe owning land somewhere in northern Michigan someday and building a space where people can connect, build community. Anyway, we've been kind of stuck on like, how is this going to happen and how are we going to get to this point? We're out in Utah and there's one morning, it was a work day morning during the work week. That's notable for me because during the work week, especially in the morning, I feel this pressure or this pull, like I need to be working. I have to be doing productive work. It's like 10 a.m. We're sitting around a fire. Every ounce in my being is like, I shouldn't be here right now. I should be at my computer. I should be working. Lo and behold, what do you know? All the way out in Utah, we end up connecting with and having a conversation with a guy who is from northern Michigan, who owns property up there, who is in the real estate space and builds these beautiful homes and has this vision of creating this space up there and this community exactly like we've talked about. And we connected sitting around the fire, almost like primal in nature for an hour talking about this and the vision. And, I don't know what's going to become of that, but it was just an example for me as I've been thinking about allowing versus pushing of, wow, when I could just allow myself to be present and be in a space, look at what manifested, look at what happened. So I thought that was a relevant story.
I got chills from that story, man, because I know exactly what you're talking about. And I know that some people who are listening knows what that feels like. That moment where you feel like you have to do everything yourself. And when you finally, what I would call surrender and just trust in whatever forces is going to guide you, like whether it's, God, the universe, the manifestation of a desire, like whatever it is that is your calling that's supporting you in your life, like not you as an individual, but you as this life experience, things will align if we just get out of the way. And so that is a beautiful story. And I'm excited to see how like you said, how that progresses. This may not be the connection point that brings you to the vision that you and your wife have, and yet it's one step forward towards whatever it is that you guys are creating. So yeah, thank you for sharing that story. And so in that, it's like, I feel like you shared a little bit of what you've uncovered in this exploration for you. And so I want to get back to your podcast, the life that you are creating. You said your mission is to make life meaningful. And I watch you and I listen to your podcast and I see what you are, again, exploring in this world of just like listening and sharing stories and connecting with others and even connecting around, with this man around the fire. What was the thing that brought you to like, just from the idea of like, I want to create this podcast, to being like, this is it. This feels really important. Why is it so important for you? And what have you learned from the experience of creating your podcast?
I think I have to go back for a second because I haven't always had a mission in life to make life meaningful. That was by no means the thing that I aspired to. There was a period of my life where I sought a lot of things that were maybe opposite of meaning. I was very aligned to my career progression. I was very aligned to making as much money as I could. I was very aligned to material status and things that I thought were going to not bring me meaning, but that I thought were going to make me happy, I guess. And so that led me to a place out of college where I called it like my millionaire time, where that was my aspiration. I wanted to make as much money as possible. I wanted to have this business. And the thing that I look back on and makes me kind of cringe the most, Angelo, is that I applied that same belief to all the people around me and all the people close to me. And I was like, you know what? If I want to do this, all of you should want to do this and have all of these things as well. And in fact, if you don't, then I put myself on this high horse and I kind of looked down on people. Then I went through some experiences and just kind of learned that, maybe these things that I'm aspiring to maybe they're not bringing me this happiness that I thought that they would. And maybe they're not bringing me meaning in my life. And that led me on an exploration of figuring out, what does meaning mean? And specifically, what does meaning mean for me? And that really led me to this phrase that I now use, which is, whatever you do in life, make it meaningful. And that's around the idea that what's meaningful for me is not going to be what's meaningful for you. It's not going to be what's meaningful for someone listening to this conversation. I think that's the beautiful thing, is that we can all come to our own definition and realization of what that means. So that felt important to share because that had not always been my mission in life. Part of meaning for me is when I get to connect with people on a deeper level. One of the things, so the podcast was something that was always something I aspired to, I wanted to create, I was interested in doing, so it was always a dream of some sorts. I think what led to it, a couple of things manifesting and actually happening, was when my wife and I moved into our van, which is where I currently am. We live in a van at the moment. We have for the last 2 years. The sense of community changed. It was different. You don't have people that you're seeing all the time. You're traveling around the country. You're meeting other people living a similar lifestyle, but you see them in fleeting moments and then you're gone and you're each going on your own path. You don't see them for a while. So it was a lack of some of that deep connection in my life that I wanted to create some, almost a systematic way to connect with people on a deeper level. And I think the other part of it was I finally accepted some help in the form of, I was working with a coach, my friend Nate, and I finally said, I've got some of these things that I want to do and I'm not doing them on my own. So maybe someone could kind of help me uncover the things inside of myself or the things that I needed to realize or reflect on or change. And that was a big catalyst for me getting the show started in the first place.
I love that. Thank you for walking us back to what brought you here to this point. And the other thing is that I find really interesting. One, you saying being willing to accept help, which I know is something we got to discuss on when I was on your podcast, and something I see every day in the work that I do is men's resistance to, one, admit they need help, two, ask for help, and three, allow it to actually support them. So I see that in the conversation that you had about your coach, but I also see this in your relationship. And I don't know all the ins and outs of your relationship, but I love that you and your wife, Eileen, right, are doing it together. Yep. I love the collaboration that you guys have going on. I would love to hear a little bit about your relationship and how this thing kind of has merged, because I imagine you guys traveling together, living in the van, really going from place to place, deciding where do we go next, and you have this grand vision of what you want to create in the future. But I find this really beautiful of how you guys are moving through it. And I know every relationship has its intricacies, but I'd love to share for you to share a little bit on like, what's it been like to being that collaborative for those maybe men or women who are listening that have that desire to like, I wish me and my partner have this romantic relationship, but also have this shared vision together and actually taking steps forward. What has that given you? And has it been something that's been always there?
I know what's probably happening right now. You just heard the ad music play. You're starting to tune out exactly what I'm saying, so you can skip this ad and get back to the conversation, and I'm going to encourage you not to. Because if you continue to skip this ad in order to get back to the conversation, then at some point there may not be a conversation for you to get back to. Okay, now that I have your attention, that might have been a little bit exaggerated. Likely, I'm not going to stop producing this show, but you can help me make this show a lot more viable, and so I can continue doing this into the future. Fun fact, I don't make any money from this show. In fact, I actually pay in order to create these episodes on a weekly basis. And while that may not exactly seem like your problem or your issue, if you like meaningful conversations like the ones that we have here, well, then it is your problem. I could use your help in the form of financial support specifically in order to keep this show going and continually invest back into creating it. Here's another fun fact. If everyone listening to this episode were to donate the single cost of a cup of coffee, I could probably do this as a full-time job. That is a dream and a vision I have for myself one day, and I want this to be like PBS or NPR, where it's funded by the viewers. I'm imagining a show where we, together, collectively, decide that these meaningful conversations are important to us, and we don't rely on outside help or advertisers in order to keep them coming on a weekly basis. So yes, this is a long-winded way of saying I'm asking you for money. If you're in a place where you feel comfortable doing so, I am asking you to make a small donation to support the show. You can do that by following the link that is in the show notes of this episode to a place called Buy Me a Coffee. Now, by buying me a coffee through this platform, you're not actually buying me a coffee. It's just kind of a mental construct to make this transaction of money a little bit more tangible. Thank you in advance for considering supporting me, supporting the show, and for supporting meaningful conversations like the one we're about to get back to right now.
No, it has not always been there. I will say that as far as what it has given me, and then we'll walk back into how the experience has been, it's been a huge blessing in my life and in our marriage and in our relationship to be co-creating things together. And whether that's the podcast that I host, which she plays kind of the producer role, and she's helping me find people to come on the show. She's helping book people. Recently, she's a meditation guide. She creates her own meditations. And recently, we started sending some of her meditations before some of the episodes to our guests and then afterward as well. And so it's been a really special thing for us to talk about the things that we each want to create and help one another make those things happen, and realize that each of us has unique skill sets and perspectives that we can bring to the table that when brought together, when married together, literally and figuratively, it allows us to create things that we couldn't have created on our own. Has it always been that way? No. This has been a huge learning experience. You know, it's just different than the typical relationship setup or marriage setup when you move into whatever we have, 50 square feet together, and you are traveling together, and you are together almost 24/7. There really is, it's very rare that there's any time or reason why we would not be together in the van. Now, on a separate note, we've actually kind of found that that's maybe not the healthiest thing. So we've actually we have in our calendar times where we are scheduled to be apart. We are scheduled to have some of our own time, or else it might not happen. And we've determined, especially for me, I'm someone, I need some of my alone time. So we've had to navigate that. But it's a difficult relationship being someone's spouse and being a business partner. And it's been a challenge for us to navigate. There's times where I think we do it really well and it's fun and we're creating together and we're working towards our visions. It's really rewarding and fulfilling. And then there's times where maybe we lean too much into the coworkers type of relationship and space, or business coach or mentor type space. And it's kind of like, whoa, hold on, time out here. Like we're married, we're husband and wife. Our relationship, we don't want it to be defined by the work that we do together. So it's been this really big learning experience of figuring out how to navigate it. Sometimes we do it well, sometimes not so much. And at the end of the day, I'm really grateful that we have this element of our relationship where we are creating things together. We're both entrepreneurs. We both have our own businesses, and some of our businesses overlap with one another. And that's really cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. And I love all the little nuggets you dropped in there about what has made it work, right? Scheduling time apart. I think I shared this recently, that it's like, you have all ends of the spectrum. You have couples that it's 100% business-like, where it's like, you're apart all the time, just doing, and barely, even when you come back together, it's just for like the agenda of like, all right, who's going to take out the trash and who's going to do this chore and that chore. And it becomes this business-like relationship, and you lose all intimacy. You lose all connection. And then on the other end of the spectrum is you have those relationships that are so codependent on each other that there's almost this like fear of going off and having some alone time. And so I love that you guys are playing with this exploration of like, how can we have both? Because it is possible. Like there's no one way that relationships are supposed to be. Like you can play around and play with the balance of this and play with, more time together, more exploration time. And especially as you guys are traveling and meeting new people and finding a new community at a new place that you're at, it's like it opens a lot of possibilities of how to make it work. I'm actually curious because I asked you this before we recorded, but I was actually hold on, don't answer it yet. Where are you guys right now? Where in the world is the camper van life brought you to?
So right now we are exploring Idaho. So we are in McCall, Idaho, which is a beautiful, I get in the vibe. I think it's kind of a seasonal town. It's right on the lake. I think this is just before their season. But Idaho was one of those states that I guess I didn't have a ton of expectations for. Central Idaho in particular, beautiful mountains, lots of lakes. So we've really been enjoying it. But that's where we are right now.
So let's go back a little bit to talk about the podcast, because right now I'm working with a group of guys, and their assignment for this week is actually to go up to somebody, whether it's somebody they know or somebody they work with, maybe a family member, and take the conversation, literally, I said this to them, a level deeper, right? And it's like we talked about earlier, like that is a skill, and that is challenging for a lot of people. In you having these conversations and bringing these conversations a level deeper and putting it out into the world, like what kind of feedback have you received from people about the experience of them listening to them and the encouragement that they've gotten to connect with people more often? And even from the guests that you've had on your show, like I know that a lot of people, when they find out I have a podcast, everybody comes up to me and is like, oh man, I have this idea for a podcast and I want to do it. And they, they're always hesitant to it. So from a guy I'm probably close to the episode in my 30s right now, and you've been doing it, like I'd love to hear your perspective on what it's been like to put yourself out there, have these conversations, put it out in the world, and what you've heard back from people in terms of that experience.
Well, I'll say for me, it's been one of the most rewarding things that I've done. There was one other quick story that I guess led to starting the show, which was that I was at this wedding in Mexico for a friend who was from Michigan, and we were spending time with the bride's family, and we were just sitting in a pool relaxing, and I ended up striking up this conversation with a woman who was probably maybe 60, 65, because she had just retired, and we ended up just floating in the pool and talking for probably 30 minutes, and I was asking her, I'm 29, 30, actually, I just turned 30 a couple weeks ago, which I've forgotten. I'm nowhere near retirement, and I got asking her all these questions about, what was it like? Are you finding it difficult to go from having your life be so focused on work and having work be a big part of it and shifting into something new? And what's your identity like as you're going through this? Anyway, fast forward a week or two after this wedding, and the woman who I didn't know previously before this, she sought out my contact information, and she sent me this long message. And essentially it was just like, it was really incredible how you just held this space, and you were curious, and you listened, and you wanted to learn more about my story, even though it didn't really seem like it related to what you were going through. And she kind of asked me, how did I learn that? Did I like take a course or something like that? So that goes to my belief in the show, which is that I believe anyone's story can have an impact on my life experience. When I'm having a conversation with someone, I think of it of like gathering tools and putting them in my toolbox. There's something that I believe when Angelo is sharing his story, he might share something that's relevant to me now. He might share something that might be relevant to me in the future. It might not be the exact story, but it might be a perspective or something that I can gain. And so I'm just gathering these tools. I'm grabbing them, I'm putting them in my toolbox, and trusting that someday, sometime, something that someone shared is going to be relevant or important to my life. So for me, that's been really rewarding and meaningful. It's funny, on the feedback side of things, sometimes I wish there was more feedback. I think the most important feedback that I've gotten often comes from my guests themselves. My show has, other than having deep conversations, there is no theme to the show. There's no topic. I am interviewing everyday people. And a lot of times, the people that I'm interviewing have never been interviewed on a podcast before. It's their first one. So some of the most meaningful feedback that I've gotten is from those people, those guests that have said, you know what, this was just really powerful for me to be able to share some of my story. And I've never had this opportunity. I've never had someone be curious and listen and ask questions. So that's been I think, for me, the most meaningful thing has been, before I even share this with the public, when I can sit across from someone virtually, or I've done a couple in person, and they can share that, this was really meaningful for me to share some of my story. Thank you for providing this space. I think that's been the most meaningful connection point. Now, there's been some really cool stories of people who have, one was, a teacher who had shared one of my episodes with her class of like 7th graders, and it talked about failure and led to them having some conversation in the class about failure. So those things are really cool, but I think it's the connection with the guests and just being a listener and providing them that space that's been most meaningful for me.
I feel you so much on that. And usually the thing I tell people when they ask me about podcasting and the experience of it, it's like, do something that is going to light you up. That it doesn't matter if one person listens or 1 million people listen. Like, it doesn't matter. It's really about, are you interested in having these conversations, connecting with people, like you said, learning from their experience, from their stories, really listening, exploring yourself as you have these conversations. That's what I've gained out of it, and I hear you kind of sharing the same thing. And I want to go back to the pool and the wedding in Mexico with the question that she posed to you, how did you learn that? Because it's not a common skill, especially in today's society where it's so much people wanting to like project themselves outward and talk about themselves and share about themselves, or kind of hide in the background because the spotlight is a little bit scary. It's easier and safer to play it small or play it so big that you become the biggest energy in the room, that not a lot of people learn and tend to the skills of really listening, of being available to hold a space for somebody else. I know how I learned it, and I'll share the story in a little bit, but I'm curious for you, where did that come into your life?
An element of it was learned through the demonstration of my parents. My mom is that person that is willing to sit down with you for 2 or 3 hours and talk through something that you're going through. So I felt a lot of the power of holding space for someone because I got to actually experience it when my mom would just sit with me and I get to talk through all the things that I was going through, and having someone allow you to share the things that are on your mind. I felt it. I knew what it felt like in my being, in my body, and to be seen was such a powerful thing. So I felt it from my mom. I think on the curiosity side of things, I learned that from my dad. He was someone that when he was going to go into a new endeavor, a new business thing, he would just take all this time to be curious and go talk to people and learn. And that toolbox idea, I think, was something that I took from him. He passed when I was 17, and so I reflect a lot on the things that I saw from him, and I haven't gotten to have these conversations to share the things that I learned from him with him, but it's powerful for me to reflect back on those things. And then some of it is just some of my own learned experience. So I got to see my parents demonstrate some of these things, And then in my own experience, I just continue to find that when I was curious with people, when I was open to hearing someone's story or perspective, when I was open to putting some of those things in my toolbox, it just kept happening again and again. Well, in the moment, it would feel really good. It felt good to connect with someone in that way. And then it just kept happening that things would come up in my life and I'd reflect back on some of these moments in these conversations, and it just kept building the belief that like, yeah, this seems important. This seems like something that I should continue doing. And as we talk about, just operating on a higher energy, higher vibration, it felt like something that I wanted to have in my life consistently. And so that led to the mechanism of having this show, was just a way that I could connect with people thoughtfully on a consistent basis.
Yeah, it's amazing that that is something that you got to experience at a young age from your parents. For those people that who are listening who have that kind of upbringing, just want to fully encourage you to bring more of that out into the world, because we need more people like yourself sharing these stories about this is important. Connecting at a human level, especially the more and more technology starts to bombard us and isolate us, and current topics in the world are dividing. Once we connect with that level of curiosity that you're talking about and actually just listen to each other, there's just so much that we can come to realize that like, oh, your story may be very different from mine, but I can see where I can see where I can put myself in your shoes. And so if that is you listening right now, that you have that capacity, share it with the world. And I want to speak a little bit about my experience, because it's complete 180 of what you just shared, where not because I wasn't shown it by my parents, but mainly because it was kind of a learned behavior that I had of a little bit of isolation and distancing myself from vulnerability and closeness with anyone, not just men, but just with absolutely anyone. And it was only once my wife encouraged is a gentle way of saying it, but really pushed me towards, so like, hey, like take a look at this. Like really, this is ruining our marriage. It's ruining your connection to your child. It's like you're disconnected from yourself. And her encouragement brought me into a men's retreat, which I learned the power of just sitting with somebody and listening to them and listening to their pain and their struggles and their challenges, and listening to what it was that they were going through with an open heart, without judgment, without criticism, without making them wrong or me wrong, and just being curious and listening, and then being able to repeat back to them what I just heard, just what we're doing right now. For me, it was like a totally new world. It was not something that I really allowed myself to do. I found myself numbing out and isolating because it was uncomfortable. And it took a while for me to start taking those steps. And now, knowing what I do, what I know now, I couldn't see it any other way. I look back at the old self that was so alone, and I see so many people now. Because I was there, I can see it in others, and I can see the pain that it brings. So I just love that you are lifting up this idea of like, let's get curious, let's connect. Let's see what's going on in each other's worlds, and let's just go, like you said, a level deeper. So just want to say thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. I'm curious about your message to people. I had that demonstrated in my life. I saw it through my dad. He went to men's retreats. He worked on himself. And so it was kind of demonstrated that was possible. What's your advice to a guy who might be listening who is in that stage that you were in, that was like, no, I'm not open to this different way of thinking? It was your wife who, as you said, encouraged you to do it. What about for the guy who doesn't have that? What's your message to them?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that question. And if anyone is listening to this, and if anyone is like even just following someone on social media or reading certain books, that it's like that curiosity is starting to turn on for you about like, there's something else here and I just don't know what it is, and it's uncomfortable. I'm a little bit scared of it. And we talked about this on your podcast when I was a guest on there. My encouragement is to just allow that little voice of yours that absolutely knows that there's another way, that knows that there are people out there that can support you in this possibly scary journey of whatever it is yet to come, and listen to that voice and just allow it to get a little bit louder and a little bit louder and a little bit louder until it starts to drown out that other voice that's telling you this is not safe. Like, I better just stay the way that I am. Like, things aren't quote unquote bad enough yet, right? Like, it's okay. I can handle this. I'll figure it out. Maybe there's other ways. Like, if you're listening to this and if like there are steps you need to take, that doorway is right in front of you and you don't know what's on the other side, but it's time, just trust. And like we started back at the beginning of our conversation, it's like once you allow yourself to surrender into the unknown, trust what's on the other side, and take the actions, which are the steps towards that new way of being, then things start showing up for you. Like the conversation at the campfire, right? The way I describe it with like the wind at your back with the parachute in front of you, like pulling you in the right direction. And I'm not here to say that it's an easy journey, but if you're talking about making life meaningful, which is what you're talking about, there's nothing more meaningful than honoring yourself, learning more about yourself, experiencing all there is to experience in life, and just go all in. Go all in. Allow yourself to feel the struggle and the celebrations. Allow yourself to feel the pain and the joy. Allow yourself to feel the anger and the love, because that is life. That is life. So that's what I got to say.
I think that's beautiful, man. And the one thing I'll add or reflect is this idea that things don't have to be bad in order to want to make them better. That's been a huge part of my life. My wife and I believe, have a great relationship, and we regularly see a couples therapist. I believe that I am a very self-reflective person. I like to think of myself as a relatively good person, and I have seen my own individual therapist for over 3 years. And it's all based on that idea that things don't have to be bad in order to also want to be better and to improve things, and that better is always possible. So I just think that's a really important thing that, as guys, sometimes I've found myself getting stuck thinking, well, I mean, it's good enough. It's fine. So I don't have to invest into it. And yet when I do, you're opened up to this world of, wow, I didn't know that this was even possible for it to become even better. And it is possible.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because you are 100% correct. It's easy to even like look at the healthcare system, right? It's like, I don't need to do anything until I get sick, until something goes wrong. Then I go see a doctor. It was like, well, what about not only preventative care, but what about like taking care of your physical health and exercising? I just started going to see a chiropractor, which I'd never gone to in my life. And it's like I was having all these issues, and man, I feel so good. And there's all these ways in which we can really seek what else is out there. And it brings me back to, you shared a little bit about your relationship and seeing what's capable when you come together and do things together and have a shared vision of how much more you can create and how much more you can do. And I have the same experience with my wife and I was having this conversation with someone just yesterday of, in this work that I've done, in this journey that I've done, like I've seen my capacity expand. And if I were to bring my wife on here and she talks about the work that she's done on herself and everything, like the capacity that she's had to expand. And only recently have we come together and actually done that work collaboratively for our relationship, working with somebody who's a relationship coach and like amplifier. And now, it's not just like what I can create alone and what she can create alone, bring us together. And now we like double that. It's like, it's exponential. It's absolutely exponential of how much more within that relational dynamic, working together, doing this work together, can take you to. So fully agree. You don't have to wait until things are bad to elevate yourself, to explore what else is possible.
In this realm of collaboration, I've got to share that for a while, I thought my wife got a lot more value from me being involved in her businesses, and that, I had maybe some more direct business experience. And so from a marketing standpoint or a business building standpoint, I kind of looked at it as like, well, I'm helping her with her business, and I don't really know if there's that many ways that she can help me with mine. And it's just been recently that I've started to allow some of her help to come in. And it's been incredible to see, like we talked about with the podcast, that it's like, oh, she has all these skill sets that I don't have, and she can bring this energy that maybe I don't always bring. And so maybe it's not these super tangible, business-oriented things that she's bringing to the table. Sometimes it actually is. And it's some of these qualities that she brings to me, to the people that I interact with, in a different way of thinking that she brings to my business and the things that I do, that I've found to be really beautiful and not what I initially expected. And so just allowing her some space to bring what she wants to bring to the table has been really, really impactful.
Love that, Chad. You know, I'm looking at the clock right now, and you asked me this question before you start recording, where it's like, do you ever find it really hard to start closing down the episode when you're just in these like beautiful, deep conversations, but the time's coming? I'm like, yeah, it is always hard saying goodbye, but I always know that there's the opportunity for us to reconnect again. And we're getting close to that point where this has been an absolutely beautiful conversation, beautiful exploration. Thank you for sharing all the stories that you have, all the learnings, all the tools that you put in your tool belt from the experiences, and encouraging others to get to that next level of depth with their relationships, with people they meet around the fire, with just a stranger, or even like a close loved one. And as we start to close up, say somebody, one, of course, I'm going to encourage everybody, if you're listening to this, go check out the A Level Deeper podcast. I'm going to have the link in the show notes to that. But if they want to reach out to you and just kind of connect with you or Eileen about the work that you guys are doing, the vision, maybe somebody listened to this and they're like, oh man, I have this vision about land in Michigan as well. And again, that's where these doors start opening. How can they connect with you? What else do you want to share with them about what you guys are creating together, or even for yourself individually?
Well, thank you. I would say Instagram is a good place. My personal Instagram is at Chad M. Miles. And then if you want to connect with my wife and I, we have a van-oriented Instagram account, which is at The Miles Van Life. And so if you wanted to reach out to both of us and just kind of keep up to date on where we're traveling in the van, I would say those would be the two best places to do so.
Awesome. And I'll have those links in there. Check out the podcast. I always like to leave a little bit of space here at the end. If there's something that you came onto this podcast being like, I really want to share this with the listeners, or maybe in the conversation, we kind of, in the quickness and the depth in which we've gone, maybe we skipped over something that you had that you wanted to put out there. Just a final little space for you to share any piece with the listeners that's alive in you and your heart right now.
I think back to this idea of just allowing space for people. I think my hope in my show, and you're doing it and demonstrating it with your show, is to give people space to share what's on their mind, to share some of their story. And I guess that would be my message, is to use this maybe as some sort of an example of how you can go in your own life and just be curious with somebody. Sit down and really give someone space to share what's on their mind, and see where that leads, because it's led me nowhere but good places so far.
Yeah, I love that, because for me, it took me being able to see somebody else leading the way and doing something, doing it another way, for me to actually realize like, oh, this is possible. And I have the capacity to do it. So whether it's relationship, whether it's self-care, whether it's creating a podcast, whether it's having the grand vision, in just hearing these conversations and watching others do something, let that inspire you. And again, let that volume on that voice that's really encouraging you to take that next step to be amplified and to lead you, because that is the voice of, the universe or God inviting you to the next thing for you. So with that, Chad, I just want to say thank you once again. And before we leave, I got to say this because I've been thinking it for a long time. You have a great podcast/radio voice. I don't know if anyone has said that to you before.
I've had a couple people say that to me. The first time that I ever stepped into the podcast realm was actually, I was working on a podcast behind the scenes, and the host was sick that day, and it was like, we need to keep the show. And it was like, Chad, go fill in and be the host. And so that was my first time ever hosting a show. And then one of my coworkers was like, oh my gosh, you have this radio voice. Like, this is perfect. So anyway, yeah.
Love it, man. Well, I really look forward to the next time we get to connect, whether it be on a podcast or just, maybe we run into each other at the campfire, wherever in the world we may be. But it's really been a pleasure both to talk to you on your podcast, to have you on here as a guest. Just love what you're doing. Keep on doing it. And as with all my guests, I would love to close with a short visualization. I invite you to just close down your eyes and take a deep breath. And if you're listening, invite you to do the same. And maybe something is stirring that is meant to come up here as the final words that we get to hear from you, Chad. So as you breathe, I invite you to find yourself on an open field. Thousands of men are with you, and you are about to address the world. You begin to speak, and I want you to finish this sentence. We are the men who
can be a new example of what is possible.
We are the men who can be a new example of what is possible. Thank you, Chad Miles. Thank you for joining us on the We Are the Men podcast. And listeners, if you liked what you heard, please take a moment to rate and follow to help us reach more listeners. All of us know men who could benefit from hearing these conversations. Please share this podcast today with someone you know. I'm Angelo Santiago. Thank you, Chad Miles, and we are the men.